everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Ambitious Dads podcast. Today, I have an extraordinary speaker to interview. His name is Carl Manlan, and Carl is a global leader whose career has taken him from the African Union to the Global Fund to the EcoBank Foundation, and now at Visa, where he's driving inclusive economic transformation across Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. He's been honored with the Mo Ibrahim Fellowship, one of Benin's highest civilian distinctions, and recognized globally for his innovative approach to financial inclusion and social impact. But here's what really caught my attention. Alongside all that, Carl is an incredible dad to 2 children and is co-hosting a podcast of his own with his daughter, Claire, called Inside the Blueprint. So we're going to be asking lots of fun questions about how that came to be. So, Carl, thank you so much for joining us. I'm super excited to have you. First of all, if there's any way you want to expand on my introduction, by all means.
No, it was a good introduction. And I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. So, Carl, you're now based in Dubai, and you're very global, right? And in fact, we're talking and chatting, and you are in South Africa at the moment, and I am in Spain at the moment. Tell me what it's like, first and foremost, to try to raise kids and be all over the globe.
I think the children ground you. And that's probably the best gift that I've ever had from a leadership perspective. To remind you that whatever you do, whatever you are, they don't see it. It's your presence that matters. You know, you can be wherever you're in the world, in these boardrooms, in these communities. All they care about is the fact that you are present in their lives. And when they were born, when I used to remind them every time I would travel that I'll be coming back. So there was this very interesting moment where you're speaking to a very young child that doesn't really understand what you are saying, at least from my perspective, because there was no response. But I'll tell them what I was going to do, where I was going to go. And this trained me in making sure that I always have a conversation with them about where I go. And when I come back, there's a moment that needs to explain what I did. So raising children is first and foremost being present, even if it's just 20 minutes in a week that you manage to see them. Those 20 minutes have to be fully on them and with them, and to do the things that they want to do, and not the 20 minutes that you have to do the things that you would like to do with them. So it's been a journey of understanding what it means to be responsible for 2 lives, more than anything. So I think, the work that I do is important. It allows me to support them the best that I can. At the same time, the work that I do has to allow me to explain to them the way the world is changing and the world in which they will be hopefully leading in the field that they choose to do so.
So this is beautiful. So you're saying that you're incorporating like a story about what's happening in the world in the context of why and where you go to travel?
Correct. So my whole life has been around social impact, has been about inclusive communities. And on the other hand, I have my wife who's an accountant or a financial manager, and she spends a lot of time in spreadsheets and numbers. And they see very different ways of approaching the world. We're both in corporations, and the role that I have doesn't require me to look at spreadsheets and numbers all the time. It allows me to bring these two together. And when they come and look at my computer, they only see words, images. When they look at their mother's computer, they see spreadsheets, they see Excel, they see numbers. And I want to make sure that they see both hands of the same puzzle. And I'll tell them that numbers is actually something that they do every day. Or let's say mathematics is something they do every day. from slicing a piece of bread, from putting sugar or butter on the toast, or putting sugar in the coffee or tea. These are elements that allow you to speak the language of world. Because if you don't understand mathematics, you will struggle. And that was the conversation that I often have with them, in the sense that it is something that you don't necessarily have to master it, but you have to understand it. And yeah.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. I love this because in my interviews of these hundreds of ambitious dads, one interesting thing kept coming up that I wasn't even prompting, which was all these dads saying, I wish I could explain to my child like why I'm working and like what I'm doing in a way that can connect with them, in a way that they can understand why I can't always be present. And here you are doing an incredible job, like boiling down what it is that your wife does and what you do into a context that they can really understand and kind of create their own evaluation of the world. It's really powerful.
It's critical. And I remember before I became a father, a very close friend of ours, named Tombekaya, said to us, speak to your children as you speak to an adult from the time they're born, because this will teach you the habit of engaging with them in a way that you have to think about, okay, how do I say this to them in a way that they can understand? So it's a constant adjustment between the audiences, you know, and we do this very well in our corporate or our professional, personal lives with adults. We have to do the same with our children, because their words that just mean nothing to them. What does social impact mean to a 11 and 13-year-old? Well, you can translate that into ensuring that they can recycle their old clothes and take it to a thrift store or to the cousin who is a size smaller. So that is elements that they can relate to, because, okay, this belongs to me, it doesn't fit to me anymore. Somebody else can make use of it. There's an impact in it. And that's really critical to me, to make sure that I remain grounded into the age in which they are and I grow with them. Otherwise, I think I may lose them. I may lose them because they have a world which is much more diverse than the world I grew up in. Very simply, when I was growing up in Abidjan, I didn't have internet. So I didn't have any reference point beyond what my teachers in my school were telling me, beyond what my parents and my immediate family were sort of telling me, and what was the definition of success. And in my time, my definition of success was getting one of these jobs that is a profession, becoming a banker, becoming an accountant, and so on and so forth. In their world, they can see and compare, contrast, and see what's the definition of success in this day of internet. And in relative terms, they can define where they fit into that sort of spectrum. And that's a much more difficult work, because I have no idea, even if I try to control the access to internet, I have no idea about what they know. And sometimes it comes in a conversation with, okay, clearly they knew more than I anticipated, but it's part of the exercise. It means that I have to continue to be in tune with what they engage with and how they engage with that content. So yeah, I mean, it's a constant work. As much it requires probably equal energy between what I have to put for work and what I have to put to make sure that they are raised in a way that they understand and find a space in the world that will be very different to the one that I grew up in.
I feel like this is exactly one of the reasons that led you to launch your podcast with your daughter. Can you talk a little bit about like how that came to be, and similar to what you were just talking about, like why is it so valuable to you as a dad to have this conversation regularly with your daughter?
So number one, going back to my initial point, it keeps me grounded because we are very fortunate to have a young girl who speaks the emotions, who speaks what she thinks in a very open and transparent way.
And by the way, your daughter is 13 or
she's 13. Yeah,
13,
she's 13.
Okay.
She's 13. Yeah. And I took her one afternoon to a studio where I was recording some short reels. And in the studio, she was sitting opposite me, and she was telling me, smile a little bit more, enunciate this way, pronounce this word that way. So I was observing her, and I was like, okay, maybe she can be also on this side of the camera. And the thought sat with me. I was flying the next day to Mexico for the book festival, the San Miguel de Allende. So throughout the flight, it was basically going through my head in terms of, okay, what could I do with my daughter, which will allow her to understand different perspectives from people that I've met in my life, people that I've just met, which will be pointers for her. So if you look at the number of people that we interviewed, we've done 12 interviews. We have 3 men and 9 women. And the number of women was always going to be by design. I wanted to have the maximum number of women so that she has different perspective of what different women have done with their lives. Because you need to be able to show in real terms and in real sense, in human size, what does success look like for each of these women and what has been the journey, so that she starts to have these different pointers in her own head. And when we started it, I didn't want this to be a created exercise where she goes through media training, and it has to come sort of naturally. So when I watch the episode from episode 1 to now, number 11 that we released on Friday last week, I can see the changes. I can see how she becomes more comfortable in front of the camera. I can see how she would spend a little bit more time doing the research on the people that she was going to interview. So none of this was done with sort of, you have to sit down and do the research. But over time, she started to develop something that she already knew in a different context, because she does it at school for the project. But this is another project where you have these strangers that you spend time with for about an hour, where you have to figure out, okay, how do I engage in that conversation? And these are some of the elements that I had seen that I wanted to give her an opportunity to sort of be there. And I remember when the team that is editing the podcast was telling me, okay, what do you write under your respective names? I said, well, you write co-host. They said, but I said, no, but she doesn't have the weight of experience that I've had so far. So if I have to put any title there, how does this look in terms of co-hosting? Then there's no co-hosting. It becomes one with a lot of experience and one that doesn't have much experience that is sitting there. I said, no, the only thing I'm going to write there is co-host. Whatever I've done before is relevant, because this is really a space for my daughter and I to explore these ideas around the world. And most importantly, to show her what's possible in the age where we consume, in the age where we are consumers of content. Can she be on the side of where she thinks about the content that she creates herself? So tell me.
Very powerful. That was also where I wanted to get to. So you're inviting her or encouraging her, or she does on her own research before each guest joins, so she has some background? Oh, that's really cool. And then what I hear you say, because one of the things that we, in the Founding Fathers program that I ran with all these fathers, one of the things that became like the hottest topic for discussion was definition of success, and like how do we come up with a new definition of success, both for ourselves as our legacy evolves to include career and family, but also for our children, because like just this old external cultural definition of success, which is money and wealth, is not what hardly anyone that I'm speaking to really wants to focus on. So you're saying you're using these interviews as a way for her to sort of absorb lots of different definitions of success.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. When I was her age, success was the successful uncle that was a banker. The successful uncle that was in government and so on and so forth, or that was working for the UN and all these different elements. If we fast forward to this generation, you have individuals that may not have gone to school and they are successful because they have a skill that they can monetize in the creative economy. My generation, if you were going to your parents to say you want to become a singer, you want to become a football player and all these sort of sports that didn't really fit, or things that were in you but you couldn't really express, it was not even a conversation. It is a conversation today. So giving children the opportunity to see a range of individuals and what they have done with the tools, opportunities that they've had is the best gift. Because it's no longer my parents, my uncles, my aunties, my grandfather, and this is too small. My generation, it made sense because there was no internet. Mm-hmm. And I remind myself when I was sitting in that classroom in Abidjan, I had no idea of what was happening even in next door Burkina Faso, Ghana, Liberia, Sierra Leone. No idea. Everything was very much constraining to that space. It's no longer the case for this generation. And as parents, the only gift we can give them is a gift of exposure. So, I mentioned earlier when we were talking that we just drove in South Africa more than 2,000 kilometers. The images that are in their heads now are one of a very different image of the country that they belong to. Because suddenly they can identify with different parts. They've met different South Africans. So if we are able to make sure that our children are exposed to different things and they can sort of get to a point where they make their own decisions as to what makes sense, and going back to elementary success, we are fortunate to be able to put them in a good school. It doesn't mean that they'll be successful. There's no guarantee. The only thing that we can do is to make sure they have elements that allow them to make better decisions when they are faced with a situation. And if God permits, we'll be around to continue to guide them. But if that's not the case anymore, then it means that they still have that opportunity to have seen different elements and arrive at the place where they can say, you know what? In that fork in the road, I've seen it before. And I will make a decision based on what I feel today, understanding all the things that I have been exposed to. That's really what parenting to me means today.
Wow. That's really powerful because one of the things I work with leaders in particular is this idea of where your goals come from. And a big piece of it is it comes from exposure, right? Like if you're not exposed to different things, your goals, your vision for what's possible is going to be a lot narrower. And so you're incorporating that into how you're raising your children, which is absolutely really creative and incredible. So let me ask, because Ambitious Dads is not just about like how we do things well, because in order to relate, we all need to know that we're going through struggles. And I'm sure, considering the success of your career, right? Leadership roles in the African Union and the Global Fund and now Visa. What's that tension been like for you between like career and your ambition around career and your family at home, and maybe talk a little bit about some situations where you felt like that didn't work as well as I wanted to, and now that you've learned from it, ways that it's going better.
The one thing that I'm very what's the word? I don't negotiate is my private time. When I come home, I make sure that I'm home. And that is often a challenge, because some commitment require you to engage after hours and so on. And I learned it from one of my previous bosses, where as individuals, we need time to think. And sometimes we don't create that space to think. You have 24 hours every day. So if after work, you have to be out every single night, you mean that you no longer have time to think and process what your day has been and what's coming. So I tend to go home and not get out. And that is a very hard discipline to maintain, but it's a choice I made. I have to be home because I need to think. I need to have time for the family. I need to have time to prepare for the work that I'm leading. And I have to be on top of it, which means that you will hardly find me outside after work. The second one, when Claire was born back in 2012, it was a very difficult time in terms of professional transition. And I was in a situation where I reacted to a situation in a way that almost cost me my job. And when I think about the situation, I did not understand the impact of my emotions in a professional setting. And I learned it the hard way. So the hard piece, without going into too many details of that particular situation, was I wrote an email where my emotions were all over the situation to very senior people. And I think I was saved because some people believed that there was something left to work with. And from that experience, I made sure that emotions are part of the work, but they have to be managed in a way that we always understand where the other person is coming from. No. Because what had happened then, I put my hat of an African above and beyond the hat of the organization I represented. And that sort of ability to navigate different spaces with different hats, with different masks, taking them, putting them on, removing them, was a lesson I learned the hard way in 2012. And to me, that ability to change the hats, to change the mask, but by remaining who you are, is critical. So sometimes in difficult situations, it is best to retreat. And retreating to me means going home and spending time with the family, spending time with either writing an article to release the tension or picking up a book. So I don't have sort of a very complex way of dealing with these situations, but I have sort of a mechanism that allows me to manage situations that I'm not too sure what to do. And once I have figured out, I think, something that makes sense, I'll re-engage and find a path to move forward. But my happy place is always that sort of time after dinner and before bedtime, where I can process the day, I can think about the challenges that I encountered, anticipate some of them, not with sort of because I have a crystal ball, but that space allows me to re-energize and really balance the energy that I need to be able to do the things that I'm supposed to do. And that to me is a place where it comes from having stability at home. And to have stability at home, you have to make sure that you invest that time and effort, that you understand the different emotions as you walk into the house, because the day has been spent apart, and you can share. So with children, I would tell them how the day has been without any sort of cover. They'll hear it. If I had a very difficult day, the emotion that I went through, the challenges that I went through, they'll hear it. They will understand, or maybe not, but they'll see it. Because I want to make sure that I have a space where these emotions can live. And for children, they have to understand that we are human beings with emotions. And these emotions need to find a space and time to be engaged with. And not every emotion necessarily has to be engaged publicly. And I say I learned the hard way in 2012.
So this is fascinating because emotions are a big part of modern fatherhood, right? And learning how our children's emotions are triggering ours, and maybe the fact that we are not as good with managing these big, overwhelming emotions as we thought we were. So, in the context of two things that you said, first, when you're going home and you're sharing your emotions, so I imagine you've figured out a way to share that productively so that it's not like, you had a horrible day and therefore you're going to explain with anger and frustration to your kids how horrible your day was. How have you learned to engage your emotions with theirs when you come home from the workday? And then my second question is, in the situation where you were, you almost lost your job because of the way you sort of instigated or shared your emotional side. How did that connect to just having your daughter? And like what was the explicit lesson there in terms of all of those emotions going through you at the same time?
So for the kids, I first have to see what state do I find them in the home, and are they receptive or not? No, because I can't just come home and just dump it on them. It's not going to work.
No.
So that's the first. If I feel that they're not there, I'll just let them know that today was a difficult day. And we can talk about it, but today was a difficult day. And it was difficult because I was not able to close something that I was working on, or what I was working on was not accepted, rejected, whatever it is. So they will have some element.
Mm.
And then I say, I'll be at my desk, either writing an article or reading something or picking up a book, but something that allows me to rethink and reframe and sort of, so that will be how. And sometimes they'll ask a couple of days later, what was this about? And then, I think I had time to digest, and I think they're in a better mental space, but they have an indication that, okay, today was not easy. And to me, that's important because they also have to understand that not every day is a sunny day. There can be storms, there can be hail, there can whatever it is, but you have to learn. And I remember when we were living in Geneva, our daughter started in the Swedish school. And the Swedish school, it didn't matter if it was raining or snowing, the kids would play outside. Which to us was something new, of course, but that philosophy really is a very interesting one as you think about managing your emotions, because managing emotions is very similar to managing your weather. Okay, you have the clothes that you wear when it's hot, when it's cold, when it's snowy, and so on and so forth. So your child has to adapt to these elements, and children are very good at adapting to these elements. So we have to remind the child in us, or the child that we see, on how they react to these situations, and how can we learn to make sure that we also keep that child in us alive, which I think is important. In terms of losing the job and the connection to my daughter, when I flew back to Geneva after that incident, it was Saturday morning, and I had a ritual with my daughter. Every Saturday morning, she was still young in a pram, but we'll go for a walk. She'll be in a pram, I'll be pushing, of course, and it would be that morning when I came back, I think we probably went for one of these 2-3 hours walk.
Mm.
I could see her sleeping, waking up, eating, us playing, and so on and so forth. But that gave me an opportunity to remind myself of a why. Why these emotions stirred me as an African. Why I had to think about my role in a large institution and the hat that I was wearing in that meeting. And also figure out where is that space in the world that I feel that I can do what I can continue to do by keeping all elements of who I am present. And that is how being in that situation, going for that walk that morning when I flew back, and getting back to the office on Monday and having to face the music and danced to the tunes that were being played as best as I could, accepting the situation and reminding myself that even if it felt at the lowest moment, because I remember in terms of rating for that year, it was very low, as one could imagine. But you sort of walk away from that situation and remind yourself that there is a higher being that is always watching over, and that situation was saved. But it also made me very much aware of the fact that there will always be tension in professional situations where your personal values may struggle in certain environment. You don't necessarily have to suppress them, but you have to learn how to communicate them and make the person understand, in this situation, this is what was triggered. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it was necessarily your intention, but this is what was triggered. And my reaction is something that I have to manage. They are not responsible for my reaction.
Sure.
And my response should have been one of engagement, not one of reaction. Because the reaction meant that I went heading first. Whereas an engagement would have been using different words, acknowledging the part that made sense, and recognizing that there could have been a better way.
Just like with kids.
Just like with kids. There you go. Just like with kids. And and I think sort of that moment of becoming a father, that was 2012, of looking at this little human being whom I was responsible for. She couldn't have an unemployed dad. So you become very grounded and you reflect on how a decision that you make, which used to be you can, as an individual, you can manage, but suddenly you have responsibility over a human being that did not ask to be present in your life. It's a choice that you made with your wife to become a parent. And they came. So they have to be given the best opportunities. And I often the Bible speaks about that, where the children are not yours. You have a responsibility to allow them to fulfill their potential. So me making mistakes to become unemployed is not helping this child fulfill a potential to the best that she could have gone to. So you have this moment of realization, okay, you know what? Your emotions are great, but you have to learn as a human being, as a professional, as a father, as a husband, that they need to be managed.
Well, that's something I found so interesting in what you said. When you talk about when you go home, it sounds like you have a decompression routine, if I heard you correctly, where you'll especially if it's a bad day, where you'll either do some writing or some reading. Now, my question is, like, one, how did you, quote unquote, train your family to give you that space to do that when you come home? And how did that evolve? So, I mean, I can imagine when your daughter's 13 and your son is 10 or 11, like they know, okay, well, dad is going into the room. He needs his time. But like when they're 4, when they're 2, that's not necessarily going to be given to you. So how did that evolve, that space and that understanding?
So the reading piece has always been a component of us engaging between us and the children. Mm. So even if I'm not reading a book as an adult, reading to them before they go to bed, create that space for a different conversation, because now you're reading a child's story, and with child's stories, you need to be engaged. You need to sort of mimic some of the voice, the intonation, and so on and so forth. So it takes the mind off, and then they go to bed. Then I have that moment, and having the writing, and he's writing with a pen, because that forces the brain to slow down. to process those emotions, to have these emotions on the piece of paper. And then at the end of it, you sort of realize that, okay, now that you have expressed what it was, what are you going to do about it? I think by the end of it, that to me is the most important. So once you have expressed those emotions, what are you going to do about them? Because ultimately, it's that ability to engage internally with these emotions that allow you to be in a public sort of engagement to write better emails. Sort of then say, you know what? Maybe was not supposed to be an email. This was supposed to be a phone call. This was supposed to be silence. And that is probably one of the most powerful elements that you learn as a parent. Silence, because sometimes the child is just silent before they will either scream or just walk away, whatever it is. So that silence, that pause, we often forget. And I think that engagement then allows me to sort of say, okay, where should the silence be in this conversation? Mm. And how long am I willing to be silent? So that I resolve my internal issues with my emotions before I can re-engage. Emotions don't lie. And even if you try to hide them, they'll surface. That's the way I think about them. Therefore, it's never an either-or situation. It's a constant engagement and re-engagement with these emotions to make sure that you're fully aware of who you are as an individual and how that affects your immediate environment, which in my case will be my wife and the kids. So the training piece comes over time where you sort of say, okay, this guy, not today. Okay, so instead of give the space, and I'll make sure that, before they go to bed, I will sort of let them know that, okay, really, today was just one of these days where I just need a bit more time for myself. I mean, they're older now to understand and see. But as younger ones, yeah, it was reading those children's book. So I still had that moment to focus on something else and then get back to the adult life that we have.
I love that. That's great. This has been wonderful. What else should I have asked you about? What else? What is one of, say, your biggest lessons that you've taken in the last couple of years with your children and again just continuing to juggle career and family?
When we decided to go on the road trip, we didn't know what it was going to be to spend all this time in the same environment with limited access to internet, because I think they were very good. And I have to acknowledge the fact that they were hardly on the phones. They were hardly on the tablets because the common objective was to observe the environment around us and see things that we had never seen and experience that together. So one of the biggest lessons is to create spaces to explore together and to have an understanding of what really was striking for them, which would be very different to what was striking for us as adults. But as we went through this sort of journey, and each evening sitting down at dinner and talking about what the day was and what they pick up, what are the things that made sense to them, you create memories together. And whatever they picked up along the way, now during this trip and previous ones, are things that will become part of their own identity. Because they have reference points of what this massive country of South Africa looks like outside of a place where the mother is from. So one of the biggest lessons of becoming a father is giving children the opportunity to become who they are. I was not necessarily given that opportunity because my mother had an idea of what she wanted me to become, which is okay. It's what she knew best. But as a as a father in the next generation, you have to then decide what are the things that I would have liked to see differently. Not as a judgment to how your parents raised you, but as a realization that times have changed. And how do you then create space for the child to be able to express themselves as they start to engage with the rest of the world and compare and contrast, which is something that I couldn't do, but that they can do now. So the most important lesson for me is to be really deeply listening to your child. And your own idea of what the success of this child will become is actually not for you to decide. Because again, they were given to you for them to become what God wants them to become.
What's so beautiful about that is the patience and the maturity emotionally that's required of a father and a parent in general to enable that, right? Because we see this hyper competitive culture where you're constantly told, like, is your child meeting X expectations? Is he above the curve? Is she above the curve on this, on this? My child is doing this extracurricular math program. Is your child doing it too? And what you're saying is create the space instead, create the space to listen, to give them exposure, and to let them lead. And that takes a different kind of maturity. And why I've been asking a lot, because I find it so beautiful the way you articulate your values and how you communicate emotions with your family and at work, because that's the hard work. It sounds like that's the work that's going to get your children to the place where you want them to be, to making beautiful decisions for themselves. So thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. I really, really appreciate this conversation. I could ask you questions for like another hour, but
we'll have time when we either meet in Spain or in the UAE or wherever that becomes possible. It's unusual also the work that you do. To have a father ask himself a question: how do I connect with other fathers around the world? And how do I create space for fathers to actually feel that they're not alone? Because our fathers' generations didn't have these opportunities to think through, what is my role in raising these children? Our mothers played a very big part in raising us, and the father figure was there. And to sort of and I think to one of the things that probably helped me shift in that direction back in 98, actually 97, December 97, I remember my father telling me, come with me to Harare so that we get to know each other, along those lines. Mm. And I was thinking to myself, okay, what is he talking about? But he knew me. I didn't know him. Mm. And that experience of getting to know your father is magical. It's magical. And I want my children, for however long time I'm here, that they get to know who I am, so that they have a memory that they can use to do the things that they want to do. It's not about remembering me. It's about remembering their own emotions and how these emotions help them become who they are. And that is really, for me, what parenting is about.
I love it. Well, Carl, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes. Enjoy the rest of your trip, and we'll speak again soon.